Risk, speculation. I was interviewed in May 2008 by the Financial Times saying, look at what's happening on oil, look at what's happening on the global commodity prices. You know, how the heck do you think you can launch an exchange in Ethiopia in this terrible time? And my response at the time was, well, first of all, we are very careful, cautious. We have a very cautious approach to risk management. The very first thing to point out is, as an emerging market, we've decided not to do what most emerging markets have done, which is to go fully into futures trading and exclusively as a futures market. So our market is set up as a spot and futures. So spot meaning trading for immediate delivery within a 10-day period. So that means that the speculative position is much lower because people are putting up 100% cash deposit when they buy, as opposed to 5% or 3% when it's a futures position. So they're not leveraging or over leveraging, as you see in the futures markets. So by the fact that we have a spot market, and right now we are only a spot market, there's very, very little scope for speculation in the current market that we've set up. There's some scope, but it's not excessive. So that's the first point, is that we are very prudent in our approach to risk management, in that we are starting as a spot exchange and then developing the discipline and the mechanisms really to then transcend into a futures system, because the futures market is much more risky, even though it's also designed for risk management. So that's kind of our approach, is first let's walk before we run. Let's get the discipline, knowing what standard lots are, knowing what the delivery system is, putting up 100% margin. Even for forward contracting, which is the next step that we're going to approach, is still going to be a very high margin deposited rather than a small margin, which is what you have in the futures. It's still primarily a delivery of the physical commodity rather than a cash settlement, which is again much more speculative in the futures. So I don't want to get too jargony and technical, but let me just say that we are very much thinking along those lines of trying to set up a disciplined market. We also have a settlement guarantee fund. We are basically, because we are a zero default system, and I told you rather proudly that our system to date has had no defaults whatsoever. That's by design. It's not because somehow Ethiopian traders are different from traders anywhere else in the world. They would default just as much as anybody else or more. But we have designed a zero default system because we have 100% pre-trade commodity deposit in our warehouse, and we have 100% cash deposit in the bank by the buyers. So we effectively have a zero default system de facto. And so that's really part of our own approach to this, the benefits of participating far outweigh the possible risks. Did I answer your question? Are you raising your hand because I didn't? Yes. We're in design, so I can't tell you exactly. It will look a lot more like an exchange in India or somewhere else. But the problem with what India has done, because when we visited India in 2006, they only had a futures exchange, and they were very excited that their exchange was growing at 300% a year and 1,000% returns on investment. And they said, forget about spot. It's messy. You have to deal with warehouses. It's a nightmare. You're never going to win against the local markets. Just go straight into futures. We went to Chicago. We looked at what Chicago was doing. We said, okay, Chicago is a lot less speculative than India and China. How did you do it? They said, well, we have a ratio where we really try to protect hedgers in the market, and we're interested in people who actually want the physical. So we maintain this balance of hedgers and speculators compared to the Indians and the Chinese. And they were very surprised that we were asking such technical questions at our first visit. So we came back to Ethiopia. We said, for Ethiopia, we think it's not prudent to go fully futures at this stage. So we made a concrete strategic decision as an exchange, and also with policymakers, that we would start with the spot market. In 2008, 2 years after we had started our 2 years later after our visit to India, the Indian government shut down rice and wheat futures trading in India because they said it was over-speculative, overheated, it was damaging consumers and farmers. So basically, they actually set up a commission to study what had gone wrong with the exchanges, and actually literally wrote a commission report that came out saying where India went wrong is they should have started with having a spot market combined with the futures. And that's the recommendation that the report made. So the Indian newspapers quoted the Ethiopian example in 2008, saying India should have learned from Ethiopia that for a poor developing country, having a spot market combined with a futures market is the sensible way to set up an exchange. And so that was a bit exciting for us to see that. On coffee, the government sanctioned 6 exporters. As you all know, it's been in the press and the blogs, and it's a very, very active bone of contention, I think, and it's actually become politicized. None of that had literally anything to do with the exchange. Who's the person that asked the question? Okay. Malasa. None of that had anything to do with the exchange. These 6 exporters, actually 5 of these exporters of the 6 are members of the exchange. They were actively trading in the exchange. They bought in the exchange, and then they took that coffee upon delivery to their warehouses, and then they didn't export it. So because they didn't export it, there's a separate law that governs coffee trading outside of the exchange, or rather overarching above the exchange, which is a coffee proclamation that was, I think, came out in 2008, July 2008, that basically says anybody who buys coffee from when it's been produced until a certain amount of months, I think it's 6 months, it has to be exported, because otherwise the value of it goes down on the export market. So there is an anti-hoarding law enshrined in the coffee law. That has nothing to do with the exchange law. The exchange law is a separate law that says whoever comes to the exchange buys and sells on the exchange and follows the rules of the exchange. So in our exchange, we don't have actually a law governing coffee hoarding or any commodity hoarding per se. So this legal action taken against the 6 exporters was for actions, as you said yourself, for not exporting the coffee after they bought it from the exchange. So in fact, in our view and the perspective we've taken and have repeatedly said in the press, is that these people did not violate any of the rules of the exchange. The exchange has no dispute with these 6 exporters. They are legitimate members of the exchange. In the domestic market that the exchange is, they were functioning according to the rules of the exchange. Now, what they did afterwards, possibly was leaking it to the local market instead of exporting it, or hoarding it instead of exporting it. These things are contrary to the law of the land. So that action had nothing to do with the exchange, and we are completely outside of that. So when it does contradict a rule that we have, we are a self-regulatory organization, meaning we have our own rules. So we can take action. We can penalize the members. We can suspend them. We can fine them. We can terminate their membership. We can bar them for trading on the exchange. None of those things happened in this case because these people did not violate any rules of the exchange. And I think that probably takes us to the last point made here by my friend, asking, well, why do you have to run around chasing after sesame if somebody can write a law saying everything has to be forced through the exchange? Well, we would like to think, and maybe it's romantic, that the exchange should stand on its own. That whether or not there's a law that forces people into the exchange, that the exchange adds value on itself, in itself. And that basically people would want to come to the exchange because there is value to be had and money to be made. To some extent that's true, but unfortunately what we see is that there's an overwhelming advantage to not coming to the exchange, which is primarily having to do with tax. Because we live in a society where, because trade has not been automated in the past, there's really no record of trade. So off exchange, it's very difficult to know what actually somebody's extent of trading has been over the year.